Ladies and gentlemen, dear panelists, dear participants, welcome. My name is Valériane Michel. I'm Deputy Head of Mission in charge of Security and External Policy Affairs, and I'm jumping in for our Head of Mission, Ambassador Rita Adam, who regrets not being able to be here due to a very last-minute commitment. It's my pleasure to welcome you at the Swiss Mission for this first Swiss breakfast of the year. The Swiss breakfast is a format that we use to discuss a topic that resonates in Brussels. It's also indeed a true breakfast, so we hope that you will enjoy the discussion as well as the specialities brought to you this morning. The event is being broadcasted. Around 70 people are following us online. To this remote but nonetheless important audience, a warm welcome as well. Today's topic is the Swiss membership of the UN Security Council and the avenues for collaboration with the EU that this will generate. Being a Security Council member is a historical moment for Switzerland, for our foreign policy, and for our diplomatic service. We have a lot of respect for the responsibilities that come with this membership, and we see it as a chance to intensify and develop our foreign policy cooperation with bilateral and regional partners. This is of course the case in regard to the EU and the EU member states. We see this membership as an opportunity to deepen our already close collaboration in the field of foreign policy and to support and complement each other's efforts. At the same time, at the time when the multilateral system is under great pressure, this cooperation between like-minded is all the more needed, and we look forward to hearing our panelists debating about it. It is therefore my pleasure to welcome Ambassador Cait Moran, representative of Ireland to the Political and Security Committee, and Ambassador Tomas Gürber, Swiss Deputy State Secretary and Head of Multilateral Affairs. To moderate this debate and to add an extra Swiss touch, I leave you in the experienced hands of Tomas Miglierina, Swiss radio TV correspondent in Brussels, who has kindly accepted to moderate this discussion. I wish you all a fruitful exchange. I wish you to get clear insights into the Swiss priorities for the 2 years to come. And above all, I wish us all to leave this room after the discussion with concrete ideas about new avenues for cooperation between the EU and the UN Security Council.
Well, thank you all for choosing us over President Zelensky. I'm sure it's not only because of the quality of the breakfast, but because of the quality of the discussion and the topic. I want to keep this introduction very short, and not only because I have a bad cold, which makes my voice even worse than usual, but because I want to maximize the space for our guests and for your questions after. You all know the topic because you've chosen to come here. Since January, Switzerland is a member of the United Nations Security Council. It is the first time in the history of Switzerland that it's a country that only joined the United Nations in 2002. Switzerland is sitting alongside Albania and Malta, the current president, and of course France and the United Kingdom as members from the European continent. Switzerland will chair the United Nations Security Council in May. And the 4 priorities that Switzerland has set for its presence in the Security Council are sustainable peace, and I emphasize sustainable, protection of civilians in conflicts, which immediately calls to mind the Geneva Convention, climate security, and enhancing the effectiveness of the United Nations. Now, this is a very important project and a very important success for the Swiss diplomacy. You can trust me because I'm not a diplomat, but I was there in the United States and also in New York in 2012. And the people like Ambassador Gürber that were there at the time were already working on this important project. But so could it be important, or could it be at least useful also for the European Union? Could this be something on which Bern and Brussels are going to work together? This is what we're going to try to find out in the next hour. Ambassador Gürber, State Secretary at the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, as I said, was the Deputy Permanent Representative of Switzerland at the United Nations in New York from 2010 to 2013. He was also posted in London and Copenhagen and held various other functions within the Foreign Affairs Department, Middle East and North Africa divisions, Human Security Division, including head of section for peace policy and human security. He has entered the Swiss diplomatic service in 1997. Welcome, Ambassador. And Ambassador Moran, we heard it already, Ambassador of Ireland to the PSC of the European Union. She took this appointment in January 23, but prior to this, she served as Ambassador, Deputy Permanent Representative at Ireland Mission to the United Nations in New York. That was from May to December 2022. During precisely the Ireland's tenure as an elected member of the United Nations Security Council. And in this role, she led Ireland approach at the Security Council on Europe, the Middle East, Asia, the Americas, and on disarmament and non-proliferation. Now, before I start with a few questions from my side to them, I want to explain you why you have a QR code on your tables. This is for a non-scientific poll. The people that are following us online, it will be easier for them to participate. For you, you have the QR code. We have decided to create this little non-scientific poll to animate the discussions, and the question we are asking you is, in the current polarized international context, will Switzerland be able to play its role as a bridge builder in the Security Council? And the possibilities are yes, maybe, no. Since most of you are diplomats, I guess I know what the answer is going to be. So, Ambassador Gürber, let me start with you. I mentioned the 4 priorities. Why the Swiss government chose these priorities and why not others?
Well, thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, first of all, a very good morning to all of you. And let me also first thank our hosts today, Valerian, Michel, Ambassador Cait, Moran for participating, and let me use the opportunity to thank the Ambassador for the support her government has given us in the way up to the Security Council, and thank you also to you, Mr. Miglierina, for facilitating us and creating this space. So we're in roughly in week 6 of our Security Council membership or experience. We've been on a fairly steep learning curve during these 6 weeks, but I should say the learning curve, of course, didn't start on the 1st of January. It started a year ago, or a year earlier, actually 2 years earlier. The whole process of getting prepared and defining the priorities has been part of that learning process, which has involved a huge amount of consultation among partners, international partners, also the EU, by the way, but also domestically, civil society, parliament. So, through consultative loops, several of them, we've asked ourselves, what are the areas in which Switzerland can make a particularly powerful contribution to the Security Council's agenda? What are the areas where the needs are greatest? What are the areas where we as a country have built up particular know-how and experience? And this is what has led us to these 4 priorities: promoting sustainable peace, protecting civilians, reinforcing the linkage between security and climate, and improving the efficiency, the working methods of the Council. So, clearly these are all, the logic behind these topics is a logic of continuity. Nothing is new. It's also maybe one of the leitmotifs of our membership. We don't think we want to surprise the international community with where we place the emphasis. Nobody was surprised. This is what most would have expected. And at the core of all of this, of course, we will continue to place a very strong emphasis on the adherence to international law, a rules-based, norms-based approach, which will always be at the center of everything we do. And everything we do, including the 4 topics, of course, are not only part of our constitution, so we have a constitutional mandate to invest in these areas, but you'd also find references to most of our foreign policy and security policy strategies. So very much, a continuous emphasis, and we hope that we'll be able to, bring something to the table which can lead to positive results.
Ambassador Moran, these priorities, do they overlap with what the European Union wants to do at the Security Council? Is there common ground to work together?
Thank you very much, Thomas. And first of all, good morning, everybody. It's really great to be here this morning to this Swiss breakfast event. And thank you very much, Ambassador Gürber, for your kind words, and to the Swiss mission for hosting this event and for inviting me along. First of all, I should congratulate Switzerland on assuming its seat in January. It's not an easy thing to do, I think, to step into this space. And for Ireland, as a small state, it's incredibly important that small states with principled values take that challenge. And we're really delighted that Switzerland is serving on the Council. I think I would come to this question from the level of both principle and then the practice. And so for us, as Ireland, and also for the EU, and Ireland being a long-standing member of the European Union, it's really important that we have a strong emphasis at the moment on values-based diplomacy and on the need to strengthen the multilateral system, which, as we know, is very much under threat at the moment. And for us, Switzerland brings exactly that approach, both in the preparation before it assumed the seat on the Council, and we can see it now in practice on the Council. And there's numbers of ways that we have worked together in the preparatory phase, working with Switzerland, as we do with other member states in terms of preparing for the Council consultations, very close relationships between capitals, between Dublin and Bern, here in Brussels and in New York and Geneva and elsewhere. And I think when we look at the priorities that Switzerland has selected, there's absolutely common ground there, particularly with the European Union. The sustaining peace agenda, very, very critical in terms of recognizing that peace can be very fragile. And there are mechanisms that we can use both through the Security Council, but in the wider UN system to address those issues. The issue of climate and security, again, a very critical issue, something that Ireland worked on in bringing a resolution to the Security Council on that issue in December 2021. While we weren't successful, we're delighted to see other countries taking forward that challenge. It's an absolutely critical issue, and one that the Foreign Affairs Council will hopefully adopt conclusions on in forthcoming sessions. The issue of protection of civilians, obviously this is very much at the heart of Swiss diplomacy and Swiss foreign policy, and so it is too for the European Union and for EU member states like Ireland, and we really look forward to that presidency in May, where we will see the Swiss membership and the Swiss leadership on that issue. It has never been more critical in terms of the attacks that civilians face in conflicts around the world. And lastly, in terms of, I suppose, that goal of enhancing effectiveness of the UN, it's a really challenging one. But if we don't do it, and if we don't engage on that, we're really, I suppose, cheating our own publics in terms of the effort and the time that we spend, because the multilateral systems are incredibly important. The Security Council, flawed as it is very important, and it's incredibly important that we can work on that issue and find little entry points where we can advance those issues. So in short, yes, there's every crossover and large agreement in terms of the approach that Switzerland has taken.
One didactical question: how does it work practically, the coordination? Because the European Union, as such, as we know, is not a member of the Security Council. We have EU members. Malta is one of them. We have Albania, which as an accession country is expected to follow on foreign policy. How does coordination work, and do you think this kind of coordination will be somehow also extended to Switzerland now?
Yeah, so there's very active coordination from the EU delegation in New York among member states. So you use the example of Malta and Ireland. France obviously is a permanent member of the Security Council. Malta and Ireland served as elected members of the Council. And there's very practical points of coordination. The heads of mission in New York meet every week. There's a briefing by the briefer of the month, if you like, the alternating between the serving members from the European Union member states to the members, the heads of mission in New York. So there's a very good sense of what's coming up on the agenda and an opportunity to feed back. So that's a very practical point. I mentioned the preparatory phase for members taking up their seats or even in their campaigns for membership. And there's a huge support network with like-minded states. So for Ireland, we worked very closely with Switzerland, consulting in terms of identification of priorities, but also in terms of working methods. What works best? How do you organise yourselves? Very, very practical issues as to how you can be most effective on the council. I think the engagement between capitals, be it Brussels to Bern, Bern to Dublin, is also really important. From an EU perspective, we have regular meetings of UN directors where the serving members of the Security Council have a briefing, have an opportunity again to brief UN directors and again share priorities and get feedback on that. So it's quite iterative and very practical when it comes to it. I think the other point is just in terms of public communication, and it's really important that we can communicate with the public how we work in the Security Council, what the priorities are, and we can help one another do that by amplifying messages and communicating collectively.
And before I go back to Ambassador Gürber, I have a short Irish question, which is also a short Swiss question, because some in Switzerland were questioning about the future of neutrality when we joined the European Security Council. You know that since the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the issue of neutrality is very much debated in Switzerland. Now, Ireland is not a member of NATO. Ireland sees itself as a neutral country. So have you had anything similar when you joined the Security Council? How do you recognize your non-aligned or your neutral spirit with being a member of such an institution?
Yeah, so Ireland does have a policy of military neutrality, and I suppose it's useful to translate what that means. It means that we don't participate in military alliances. For us, this was not an issue or a problem for us on the Security Council. And in fact, I would say that it probably adds credibility to Ireland's role, because it allows us, in the same way, hopefully, as Switzerland will offer a bridge building function. So for us, of course, neutrality is always debated in the Irish public. There's a lively debate on it. It's a very long-standing commitment and very much at the DNA of Irish foreign policy. But military neutrality does not mean that we're politically neutral. So, for example, in the instance of Ukraine, and we see a very auspicious day today in terms of President Zelensky being here in Brussels, it was very important for us to be very clear at the Security Council that we were in full support in terms of Ukraine being able to defend itself against the Russian aggression, and using the Charter, the UN Charter, and Article 51 of the Charter in that principle. So I think coming to these issues based on international law and principles is incredibly important. That's what we did, but I think we really were able to bring a credible voice and a bridge-making and bridge-building voice to the Council on that.
So, Ambassador Gürber, we heard how the European Union countries and others coordinate themselves. How much do we count on these coordinations, on this working with the European Union? And I ask you this also in the sense, if you want to be a bridge builder, you must have, the others must see you as an independent actor. So you have to preserve a certain degree of autonomous capacity of working. So how much cooperation and how much Alleingang, as we say in good English, in going it alone?
Well, thank you very much, and you're absolutely right. Of course, the Swiss foreign policy, the Swiss foreign security policy in the Security Council will be an independent policy, which we will develop based on a consideration of all perspectives. But it's at the same time fair to say, of course, that there's a huge amount of convergence with some partners in the EU and the EU member states. They generally fall in that category, which is why it's in our benefit to coordinate very closely with them and anticipate with them what could happen or what is going to happen in the Council, and that automatically leads to regular, of course, exchanges and consultation patterns in different places. In New York, which is where most of course, the immediate energy will sit, but also in capitals. So we have regular consultations with almost all major EU member states. But I should say, just in response to the neutrality point, indeed, it has also been our long-standing view that our neutrality status does not prevent us from playing a very active, constructive role in the Council, particularly given that the Council itself is, of course, not party to a conflict, so the whole concept doesn't, in our view, apply legally. So, and we have always, in the past, been very clear in our reactions to, for instance, violations of international law. In our view, that has nothing to do with neutrality. It shouldn't, neutrality, ever prevent us from being very, very clear in responding to such violations. For instance, so we do see, as our Irish colleagues, we do see the neutrality element as an advantage, rather than as an impediment or a problem, because it does give us this credibility, this independence, and what it implies is that we will and will continue to talk to everybody, to all delegations, including, of course, the P5. So we have made it a very strong element of our approach that we will continue to consult regularly with all of them, which is particularly important at a moment when they among themselves don't really discuss anymore on a regular basis. So they used to consult very closely, but that, since the 24th of February, is no longer so much the case. So what does that mean? It means we will hopefully be able to develop a well-informed appreciation of their views on all the points on the Council's agenda, and then hopefully be able to work on possible middle ground solutions, when discussions are stuck.
I want to go more specific to translate these 4 priorities of Switzerland on some concrete cases. I'd like to start, for example, talking about protection of civilians in conflicts with Syria. We wanted to discuss Syria already in the preparation of this Swiss breakfast, and now came the tragic event of the earthquake in Turkey and Syria. So, Ambassador Gürber, what's there to be done for the United Nations Security Council and for Switzerland?
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned it at the beginning. Maybe say that Switzerland has been a champion of the protection of civilians agenda for many, many years, even decades, I should say. At least since 20 years, we have chaired the New York-based group of friends, which regularly discusses this particular topic. In May, and you also mentioned it, we will assume the presidency of the Council, and one of the emphasis we want to place is exactly on POC. During the end of the month, during the regular POC week, there will be a high-level open debate, and our president, Swiss president, will chair that debate on current challenges, related to POC, based on the report of the Secretary General, which will come out a few weeks earlier, and it will list all the current challenges. More practically, of course, we will be very present in all the discussions on all the contexts where POC plays a role. And you mentioned Syria, which is the most pressing, or one of the most pressing contexts. We took over the mandate as a co-pen holder for the Syria cross-border resolution, which enables humanitarian aid to be transported into northwestern Syria, the area which is not under government control. We inherited this role from our Irish and Norwegian colleagues who did a fabulous job in advancing this discussion under very complicated circumstances. We could, at the beginning of January on the 9th, achieve an anonymous extension of that current arrangement. Now, under the influence of the earthquake, of course, a discussion needs to take place, what that means, in terms of, bringing additional humanitarian aid into this same area. We want to avoid, of course, any politicization of humanitarian aid, but at the same time, I think we need to find a new arrangement which can react to this changed circumstance.
Ambassador Moran, anything on that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, as the Ambassador noted, Ireland was co-pen holder with Norway on that file. It was a particularly challenging file, and I think from February an even more challenging file to reach agreement on, and it was extremely challenging for the council to come around that. I think maybe just to mention that I suppose it shows the success of being able to get a renewal on that life-saving resolution for over 4 million people in northwest Syria is a demonstration of how elected members and small members can actually contribute to the council. As a member of the E10, we enjoyed the support of the 10 elected members, and that's quite powerful when you sit around a council table to see that support and a joint statement from the E10 saying we want the resolution to be renewed. We had excellent cooperation with Switzerland in terms of the handover on that file. It was really essential that we were able to work in Norway and Ireland with Syria and Brazil as incoming pen holders to make sure that there was good transparency in terms of what the plan was and how to make sure that we maximised the chances of renewal in January. It's tricky when you're handing over a file at the end of December with a very short timeline to seek approval of the council to renew the resolution, and I think that worked in terms of just having a very strong communication channel with the incoming pen holders and working in a very disciplined and constructive way with the incoming pen holders. And I think that's across the board in terms of the type of roles that elected members can play, be it on climate and security through informal expert groups on climate and security, or be it on absolutely critical files like Syria. No doubt it will be very challenging ahead, but as we've seen from the really tragic events in Turkey and in Syria, and our hearts really go out to the people of both Turkey and Syria in these circumstances, that is an absolutely vital lifeline, and one which is badly needed.
Another topic which is not much in the spotlight of people like me, the journalist and media, but it's already very much in the spotlight for people like you, and might unfortunately become more popular in the future. You told me it's Afghanistan, so also on Switzerland Watch the Security Council. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Afghanistan, obviously the fall of Kabul and the implications of that has been enormous for the people of Afghanistan. And one of the tools, I guess, available to the Security Council is the issue of sanctions and the issue of trying to respond to events. For Ireland, it was incredibly important to hold the Taliban accountable after those events. And one key way to do that is in terms of looking at travel. So for Ireland, it was incredibly important that we look to hold the Taliban accountable, and that the idea that the Taliban would be free to travel outside of Afghanistan, given the circumstances, particularly of women and of vulnerable people in that country, was untenable. So we took a principled decision to oppose the exemptions in relation to the travel ban that had been provided for Taliban to travel. And that was a very difficult file. It was a very difficult issue to stand up on. But for us, it was incredibly important to do that. And in doing that, we maintained a very strong contact with Afghan women leaders who essentially had been silenced and had been shut out. So this was a way for us to make sure that those voices were heard at the Security Council table, both directly when we had the presidency of the council in September, but also in maintaining that dialogue with Afghan women leaders. So again, that was one issue I would highlight.
Ambassador Gürber, on that?
Maybe if you could just on the last point, Cait just gave a good example of what the term working methods means. It can mean, and it often does mean, bringing the right people to brief the council and bringing the right balance of people. For instance, female leaders, their voices need to be heard as well, and we will try to establish that same balance in every debate. But on Afghanistan, yes, very challenging political developments. The change of government, but also more recently, what's on our minds at the moment is the decrees which were decided in December by the Taliban, and which shrink massively the space in which women can operate in the country, including international organizations and aid agencies. So The UN system reacted to this, of course. The Security Council reacted to this. The Taliban side, I think there's currently a development of translating these decrees into what I think the Taliban call guidelines. We will have to see what exactly this means. Will it lead to a further hardening of the policy of the Taliban, or will it be a move towards a slightly more liberal approach? And the Council will react accordingly. It will react certainly in March, when the UN mission UNAMA will have to be extended. The mandate will have to be extended. The modification, the change of that mandate last March was a very positive, I think, episode. So the Security Council managed to adjust the UN's footprint to the reality of the Taliban regime. And in March, we want to do the same. We want to keep the mandate strong and adjust it to some of these developments, but a very challenging context. And of course, as in northwest Syria, the need for humanitarian aid will remain very, very high. Almost 28 million people in Afghanistan will continue to depend on humanitarian aid.
Ambassador Moran was using the word sanctions, and this gives me the opportunity to bring in yet another specific topic, the issue of delisting, of how the sanction committees work, and the ombudsman. This is one of the areas where Switzerland wants to work. Foreign Minister Cassis was actually on the record about this some days ago. So can you tell us more, Ambassador Gürber?
Indeed. On sanctions, first let me hand over another bunch of flowers to Cait, figuratively, on the same topic, because the Irish colleagues, together with the US colleagues, managed to introduce what is generally called a humanitarian carve-out, humanitarian exemptions in the sanctions context, something which we, the Swiss, have also, we've worked in that direction for many, many years. I think it's an important achievement, so that humanitarian aid will always be possible despite the sanction regime in place. Now, indeed, there are currently 15 sanction regimes in place under the UN umbrella, the Security Council umbrella. Only one of them, the regime which deals with Al-Qaeda, so-called 1267 regime, has an ombuds functionality, which is a possibility for individuals or companies that are listed to challenge the listing request, or request a delisting, after a while. We believe that this is a very powerful due process element, which should be an element of all the other sanctions committees as well. It's very close to our DNA, which is, as I've mentioned, the rules-based, norms-based DNA. And we're currently discussing, particularly with the US, how we can plant that element in all sanctions regimes and strengthen it in the regime where it already exists.
Ambassador Moran, on this?
Yeah, and thank you, Ambassador, for those nice comments. But the work of Ireland in partnership with the US, again, I think is a very nice example of an elected member working with a permanent member on something that has real-life impact. So this carve-out was incredibly important to mitigate against any negative effects that sanctions may have, and particularly very important for UN agencies, humanitarian agencies, but also civil society in terms of how they do their work, and making it easier to deliver humanitarian aid and assistance. So for us, this was certainly one of the highlights of our term on the Council, and we're very happy to see the Swiss take forward that work.
I'm about to open the floor to you and to the people online, but before I do that, I want to bring in, and I left it as a last topic precisely because it's the most dramatic and perhaps the most difficult one. Not that the others are simple, but Ukraine. So we see it. President Zelensky travels to the US, to the UK, to the European Union. President Putin travels to wherever he's gone to. In an ideal world that we don't have, they would both travel to the Security Council, explain themselves, and the Security Council would work out a deal. That doesn't work. So what are the possibilities? What are the expectations on such a dossier, particularly during the Swiss chairmanship that may come in May. That may be a difficult month for the conflict. I'll start with you, Ambassador Gürber.
Well, thank you very much. And I think probably every month is a difficult month when it comes to Ukraine. The situation continues, to worsen. The Security Council continues to be, continues to be a stalemate situation. The Security Council, given its configuration, of course, will not likely arrive at any decision, any product which can bring us closer to a resolution of the conflict at the moment, at least. Nevertheless, I think the debates which take place, and there have been, I think, 7 this year already, they create pressure to articulate, the position of the different delegations. And what also, I think, has added a layer of accountability is this transfer mechanism to the General Assembly, which has been used as a reaction to a veto, in particular, where delegations also need to explain their positions and take a stance, which gives a much better sense of where the international community at large stands regarding some of these issues. And then finally, there's one decision where the Council could agree on Ukraine in the middle of last year, and that was an anonymous encouragement of the Secretary General to do whatever he can to exploit his space to facilitate or bring this complicated situation closer to something more constructive. And he did use that authority in a number of cases, including, for instance, around the Black Sea Grain Initiative, the exchange of prisoners. We will, as Switzerland, of course, continue to help him do that, including through International Geneva, which has continued to be an important meeting place for some of these discussions, particularly around the Black Sea Grain Initiative, and that will continue to be the case, hopefully. But I admit, often the Council is, not able to react in the way it should.
Ambassador Moran.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the world has changed a lot in the last year since the Russian reinvasion of Ukraine, and that has really affected the work of the Security Council. It was already a difficult dynamic. It is much more difficult now, and as Ambassador Gürber has said, it's very difficult for the Security Council now, with the membership that's there and the permanent membership of Russia, to agree a product or agree a plan and a way forward. What it is important for the Security Council to do is to meet on these issues and to hold Russia to account publicly in that chamber. And that is something that Ireland felt very strongly about in our term on the Council, that we were very clear about the positioning of this issue under international law, and there was a moment of accountability in that. And also to give voice to Ukraine as the affected state, but also to give voice to the EU under the rules of the Council, allowing the EU to come and give a statement, and allowing affected EU neighbours to give that statement as well. That's a very powerful statement and very important way for the EU to be able to have that understanding of its position and the effects on particular member states.
Thank you very much. So it's 10:10. We have about 20 minutes before the end, which gives 10-15 minutes for questions. I already have a couple of questions online, but I'll start with the people in the room. Anybody who wants to take the floor? Bernadette Puss will help me with the microphone. Are you asking for the floor? No, sorry. In which case, I'm going to start with the couple of questions that I have received on Slido. Pascal Ras writes, cooperation among like-minded countries obviously works well at the United Security Council. Can you expand on the way to cooperate with countries that are not like-minded? This is a bit along the lines of my questions of how much coordination and how much independence, perhaps. So I'll start with Ambassador Gürber. How to cooperate with countries that are not like-minded?
Yeah, so we, as I said a minute ago, it's part of our approach to talk to everybody, including to those who have very, very different views. it's, by the way, also part of our understanding of what the US has been created for, and it's related to this notion of excluding certain members from the UN, from UN organs, in light of some things that we have seen. We have, as a general approach, always, held the view that we should not exclude, for instance, Russia from UN organs, because the UN was fundamentally not established, as Dag Hammarskjöld, former SG, said, to take humanity to heaven, but to save it from hell. So the UN was exactly created to deal with very complicated circumstances and situations, such as the ones we currently have. So there are, of course, cases where when red lines are, disrespected, when nevertheless, an expulsion is the right answer. But fundamentally, I think it's not what we should support. And as part of that approach, or as a consequence of that approach, of course, we talk to them regularly. To the Russians, we talk to the Chinese regularly. We talk to all of them regularly. And we don't agree on some points, but it's very important to understand, the rationale behind what they have to say, and sometimes what one hears is not exactly the same as what one reads in public statements or in the media. So I think it does maybe lead to a more nuanced understanding of some of the challenges and issues, and what it also does, I think.
This is important what you say, because on the record the Russians came in saying we don't recognize you as a neutral country anymore since you joined the European Union sanctions. And so.
Absolutely, but I think when you talk to them bilaterally, the emphasis is not exactly in the same place. I think there's probably a slightly more nuanced exchange on some of these issues, which does not mean, of course, that they completely depart from the line that they need to follow. But I think, if the exchange becomes more comprehensive, there's more likelihood also, to increase the understanding also, of some of these positions and arguments. Yes, so I do believe that such exchanges also establish a certain degree of regularity and maybe also confidence in the value of the space, and that can have a positive impact also on the Council.
Ambassador Moran, your experience on dealing with non-like-minded countries?
Yes, I think if you're to make progress, you can't just speak to the people who agree with you. Obviously, that's...
and that's why we have diplomats, because, we're talking to people we all agree. It's easy,
exactly,
But
exactly. And I'll answer maybe on that. I think, obviously, to get products and to get results, you need to speak to all 15, including yourselves and sometimes including your own system, on trying to move issues forward. And that can be very challenging, but the basis of the work of the Council, when you look at the subsidiary bodies, when you look at how pens are held, how processes are brought forward, allows you to do that. So through those formal structures, that gives a basis to do that, but also through informal contact as well, and building up understanding, and that point on communication, I think, is incredibly important again. Maybe one example just of where we managed to achieve agreement in a difficult space was in relation to peacekeeping. The achievement of a Security Council resolution on peacekeeping transitions, so looking at the situation when a UN peacekeeping mandate is stepped down and what happens after that. So looking at that idea of peacekeeping and peace building and sustaining peace as a continuum, where you need an approach to sustaining peace. And again, that was a very long and difficult process. It was the first time Ireland had brought a Security Council resolution to fruition and to agreement on the Council. And it's an example of where there were massive differences of opinion in terms of what could be in, what could be out of the resolution. And there are always controversial issues. Gender equality often comes up, the issue of climate and security often comes up. But by working collectively and collaboratively, there are ways, certainly in that example, where we could manage to agree on a resolution which will have long-lasting effects in terms of how UN missions can stand up and stand down in areas of crisis.
Yeah, Ambassador Gürber, we have a long tradition of carrying messages and mail for people that cannot be seen as talking to each other, at least directly. And I guess this is something where you cannot speak on the record much, but do we still do that? Do we still have the possibilities to do this? And I'm not talking about only about the specific Russia-Ukraine crisis, but in general. And will we do that now that we're at the Security Council?
Absolutely. You know, what you're referring to are protecting power mandates, which is the provision of certain services between two states that no longer have or do not have at the moment consular or diplomatic relationships. That is completely unaffected by our role in the Council. So both roles have something to do with international law. They're based on international law. But I don't think that there is a direct linkage between those roles. But if I can just maybe go back to what Cait just said, in terms of the potential of talking to all stakeholders, I think even if we're under the impression that the discussion around Ukraine has paralyzed everything, that's actually not a correct observation. If you look at statistics, you would see that in 21, the Council, I think, adopted 57 resolutions. In 22, last year, it adopted 54 resolutions. So still quite a high number of resolutions on which members agreed. So there are a lot of topics where discussions need to continue to take place, and where progress can be made.
Questions from the room? There's one question there.
Philip Wendel of the German Permanent Representation here at the EU. Since today is a lot about support to Ukraine and with President Zelensky here. And my question is also on Swiss neutrality and the arms export policy, permitting third states to export arms and ammunition produced in Switzerland. Now there seems to be some movement in Switzerland with the vote in the Security Policy Committee of the National Council, Ständerat, and also some latest polling in that regard. Could you maybe elaborate on potential future steps by Switzerland and the role of your department in that regard, and how that interlinks with the membership in the Security Council? Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I think this is an issue which I would disconnect from discussions in the Council. The reality is that the Council has not adopted a resolution on Ukraine, and the consequence of that for us, from the Swiss perspective, is that neutrality law applies. And for us, neutrality law has a couple of very clear implications, and one of them is that you must not export military equipment to any of the parties, or you would need to treat them equally in terms of exporting military equipment. And part of that legal body which governs our practice in this space also is currently, and there's a Swiss law which governs this practice, that you must not allow re-exportation of military equipment or ammunition which you have exported to a recipient country. That's, by the way, not a practice that only the Swiss follow. Many others, including European countries, follow exactly the same practice. So this is the current situation. It is true that there is a discussion in Parliament on whether or not that practice or the legal body which underpins it should be changed. But it's not up to me, what this discussion will produce. We will just have to see what Parliament's what the Swiss Parliament will come up with.
There's one question online, which is a very pleasant surprise to me. It comes from Colin Cogitore, whom I don't know, but it's from Fondation Hirondelle, whom I know. Total disclosure, I worked for them in Liberia many years ago in 1997. Fondation Hirondelle, it's a group of journalists that were impressed by the role that the media played in the Rwandan genocide, and they thought if the media could be so bad, maybe the media could do also something good. And they did a lot of works in terms of media and reconciliations in Africa. The question, it's about the role of NGOs. Swiss NGOs are known and recognized for their expertise, in particular their contribution to peace. What role do you see for NGOs in the framework of your UNSC mandate and in your collaboration with the EU? So, Ambassador Gürber, with you.
Well, thank you. First, I can only confirm that the quality of the Swiss NGO is very impressive in many, many contexts. And this is one of the reasons why we've engaged in a regular consultation process with them. We talk to them regularly, we learn from them, we take on board what they tell us, and we inform them in return. So they have informed our priorities, our positions indirectly. We will also, one of our ambitions is to try to support the UN's footprint in many of these conflict areas through our bilateral Swiss footprint. And the NGOs are often one component of that bilateral footprint. So there's another element, where we can create more synergy. We will have to see to what extent Swiss NGOs can directly contribute to council debates. Often we believe when we talk about contexts like, Mali or DRC, it's very beneficial to hear national, local voices, rather than Western voices. The council can learn more from these.
Moran is nodding, so you have similar experience. NGOs can sometimes do what the diplomats can't.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's fundamentally important for us to have civil society voices heard at the table. During our presidency of the council in September 21, we put a particular emphasis on having female voices. So we only had female briefers during the month of September to try and tip the balance a little bit in terms of that. And civil society engagement is incredibly important. Like Switzerland, we had an extensive engagement and a structured engagement with both Irish civil society and more broadly, and regular contact there. I'm conscious that the question from Colin is coming from a media background, and I think we also see media as part of civil society and playing a really critical role in shining a light on crisis around the world and bringing an incredibly important perspective to that. And we were very saddened to see the killing of Al Jazeera journalist, Palestinian-American Shireen Abu Akleh last year. And so that for us was a really important topic to spotlight. So we used the function of an area meeting, a slightly more informal meeting of the Security Council to bring attention to her killing and to demand accountability for that.
You wanted to say something?
Just maybe a footnote to confirm the importance of course, media as an important ingredient in council debates, but also to say that there is a vibrant NGO community in Switzerland, and maybe particularly so in Geneva around the European, the UN, the main UN duty station in Europe, a very vibrant NGO and policy think tank landscape, which we try to link to Geneva and to Security Council debates more systematically. We're looking for ways to increase the bridges between these two important duty stations.
One more question from the room.
Good morning, Luciana Sandupenker, European External Action Service. I'm covering Western Europe. A question with regard to one of the priorities, and of course, first of all, congratulations for the very notable result on your election at the Security Council, which speaks about a lot about the bridge building capacities. And then the question comes in relation to that: how do you see your role as a bridge builder with regard to improving the working methods at the Security Council?
And you also had a question?
Thank you. Yes, I'll jump in very quickly. Many thanks. I think that's great that we are discussing now on collaboration between us, EU and Switzerland, on those issues. And I want to ask whether this opportunity of those 2 years in the Security Council could actually have a more long-term impact on that collaboration. Having worked both in Bern at the Swiss Ministry, but also here at the EAS, I see a lot of potential. Of course, related to Security Council on the countries and thematics, but also beyond.
Yeah.
I think there's expertise developed by both sides that could be beneficial.
Thank you. Two very interesting questions. I'll give you the floor to both of you to answer. Then I saw one more question there, and then we'll have to close because we're approaching the end. I also have a question online that I'm going to use as a final question. But first, Ambassador Gürber.
On the last point, yes, that would very much be in our interest as well. There is a well-structured and increasingly, I would say, productive cooperation between us and EU partners. For instance, around the CSDP cluster, that could be strengthened and it could be expanded more to, the policy space, security policy space. I think we need to indeed reflect how we could do this more, turn it into something more sustainable. And then on the working methods, yes, there are many, many initiatives, ideas, areas where we, as a long-standing member or chair of this, it's called ACT group, Accountability, Coherence, Transparency, under the UN umbrella, how we can improve the working methods across, regions, among all members. Just to give you one example, we've been champions of this code of conduct which tries to condition the use of the veto or of no votes among council members. So this is an initiative currently signed by over 140 member states. And by their signatures, they commit that they would not vote no in cases where atrocity crimes, war crimes, crimes against humanity or genocide crimes are at stake. This will frame council debates in a new way, if we can continue to increase the number of signatures. It's just one way how we try to influence the working methods, and we do it, of course, cross-regionally.
Ambassador Moran?
Yeah, I think some of the follow-on, certainly from our term on the Council in the area of conflict and hunger, is one example I would take, where Ireland was the informal contact point along with Brazil on hunger and conflict. Switzerland have taken on that role. We continue to be chair of the group of friends of that group in New York. So there's a lot of synergies as we come off the council and into the wider work across both the General Assembly and the particular agencies that we work with in New York as well. And those are areas, I think, where we can coalesce support more widely. We were talking about the point about speaking to people who maybe aren't like-minded. Those are the types of areas where we would see building coalitions around those really important issues. And fully agree with the ambassador's point on CSTP. Wearing my current hat as PSC ambassador, I think there's plenty of scope for further cooperation there. We look forward to it.
Little question, yeah?
Thank you. Fergus McFarlane from the Australian Embassy. Thank you very much for the...
You have to use the microphone because of the people online.
Fergus McFarlane from the Australian Embassy. Thank you very much, and thank you to our Swiss hosts. My question relates to global challenges that we see emanating from the Indo-Pacific region, whether it's the increased ballistic missile and nuclear capabilities of the DPRK, whether it's increased securitization of maritime corridors and the impact on global sea lines and trade routes, whether it's the impact of climate change on Pacific Island countries, whether it's the emerging challenges to global commons in space and cyber. I'd be interested very quickly in Switzerland's position on Indo-Pacific challenges and the way it relates to broader global interests.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Ambassador Gürber.
Well, thank you very much for the question. You mentioned a number of items or challenges which are all very important on DPRK. Of course, there we will play as Switzerland a particular role as chair of that particular sanctions committee. And well, what I can say, of course, is here again we've been very clear and loud in condemning the DPRK's clear violation of a whole series of Security Council resolutions. We're very worried about their missiles program and the nuclear capability which they're developing. We're particularly, of course, worried by the possibility of a next nuclear test, and we're hoping, of course, that if that ever happens, and God forbid it won't, then the Council would have a very strong reaction to that. So on some of the other challenges, sea rise, incidentally, there will be an open debate next week on the Maltese presidency on Tuesday on this particular topic, and we will hopefully make a strong statement to emphasize the linkage between climate change, impact factors, and security policy implications. This is a linkage which, as you will remember, is part of one of our priorities, and we want to emphasize it wherever we can. And then, of course, in the Pacific space, there are strong power political interests, including from some of the P5, of course, which will, define the space of some of the council discussions going forward. But we will certainly have, an approach which will be as progressive as it can possibly be in light of that space.
Ambassador Moran, I'm going to use the last question that came online. I'm sure it was somebody from here to close this meeting. And the question was, what do you expect from the Swiss people here in Brussels during this phase, as with Switzerland being a member of the Security Council?
Well, listen, I mean, I think what we expect is close contact and communication, having that sense of what Switzerland is doing in New York. And I think that's already happening. We have a very good sense. And to identify, I suppose, concrete areas that we can take forward, both while Switzerland is on the Council, and we've mentioned a few of those this morning, and into the future as well. So I think it's about practical follow-up and having that sense. And I think we have a very good sense that that's already in action.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ambassador Moran. Thank you, Ambassador Gürber, for this discussion. Thank you all for the questions. I promised you the results of our non-scientific poll. I'm not going to be able to give you the result now for two reasons. Number one, it didn't seem that the participation was very high, and please notice me becoming a diplomat. And number two, my iPad is actually locked because it prefers Bernadette's face to mine. You can't really blame him for that. So we'll do it like this. I'm going to give you the results if you come to the next Swiss breakfast when it's going to be organized. In the meantime, thank you very much for being with us, and goodbye.
Thank you.
I'm so sorry, I don't have cards. Thank you.
I'm sure I will come back.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was a pleasure, and very best of luck for the rest of your trial.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much. Settling in.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all. You were all very good. Well, I know you because I saw you on the media and so on, but we had good rhythm and everything.
Good.
So
Well,
fantastic.
hopefully we had enough detail. It's always a balance about getting too much detail.
Yeah, no, but I think it was dense, but it was positively dense.
Yeah.
Also because this kind of audience, they want to have some substance.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.